a little bit about today's speaker. Sam Parris is a friend of the church who occasionally speaks about Buddhism, science, philosophy, and related topics. I would like to welcome Sam Parris.
Thank you. Did you ever go somewhere and get into some situation and think, how did I get here? Why am I doing this topic? Just me? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming here today. Bigger turnout than I expected. It's a difficult topic to come and listen to or learn about or think about. But it is a courageous thing to do, to think about death and to contemplate the end of the line for all of us, right? But controversial subject, so thank you all for coming. Obviously, death comes for us all, right? It's the inevitable step at the end of the path that we're all on. The path that I walk, that you walk, every path walked by everyone throughout all time, right? Death is the end step. The end of the threads of fate, I guess you could say, right? Scientifically, our bodies and minds are just energy, functions of reality, right? So over time, that energy gets gradually more and more disordered. It loses focus, it loses strength, it loses sharpness. Its edges round out and blur together. And the careful mechanics that keep us alive grow less and less effective until the end comes. But does it really? What happens after we close our eyes one final time? The reality is humans are fascinated and awed by death. Whether we fear it, we honor it, we embrace it, we run from it, or we try to defy it so much that we'd rather run to Mars than face it the inevitable head on. It's there, it's waiting for us in the end. And that makes death among the most powerful concepts that we have as humans. Maybe that's why Buddhism pays so much attention to death. Buddhism is all about using clever metaphors as a vehicle to convey some deeper meaning. And death seems like the perfect opportunity to do that because of how significant it is in our lives. Maybe that's why there's talk of it. But in many Buddhist cultures, we see a reverence for death. We see an appreciation for it that's often not present in Western culture. Contemplation of death to a Buddhist is said to bring happiness rather than fear or uncertainty. There's even an app for that. I have had this app on my phone for many years. It gives you 5 quotes a day about death, following a famous Buddhist Lama who at one point said that if you think about death 5 times a day, you can find enlightenment. So just food for thought there. But there are many Buddhist interpretations of death, and I don't claim to understand them all. Buddhism is a wide-ranging religion that's different in each country and culture that it touches, and it adapts and changes based on the local people there. So obviously, I don't know it all. But you're probably familiar with a basic concept, the concept of samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. The thing that nirvana or enlightenment is supposed to free us from. So maybe that's the most basic interpretation of death in Buddhism. Today we're going to look at one of these interpretations, which is arguably the most famous in Western culture, thanks to some people back in the day. But as with many Buddhist concepts, it has been interpreted often and often poorly. So hopefully we can get to a more accurate view of this work today together. That work is called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, at least here in the US. Many scholars now describe this title as more of a work of American spiritualism than an actual Buddhist epic, you would say. It's actually just 3 chapters of a larger book that has been taken into this context of the Book of the Dead. But I guess it's hard to come up with a comparative thing in Western culture, but it's not as significant there. It's certainly not a part of anyone's daily life or weekly reading or anything like that. It's not as significant as we've made it out to be here. But it's still a very interesting book. That book is actually called the Bardo Thodol, or the Great Liberation by Hearing in the Intermediate States. That is the actual title, not the Book of the Dead. It's actually a funerary rite as well. It's not meant for your ears or my ears or anyone alive's ears. It's meant to be read aloud by someone, usually a Buddhist Lama or a teacher of some kind, to the corpse of someone recently deceased, or perhaps to someone who is on the verge of death and after they die. It's often called forbidden knowledge or ancient teachings or something like that in the West, because it's really just not intended for us. The Buddhist Lama, the teacher, will read the book aloud in a performative way, sort of like giving a sermon or something like that. And in the opening lines of the book, it directly addresses the deceased. It says, "Alas, alas, fortunate child of Buddha nature, do not be oppressed by the forces of ignorance and delusion, but rise up now with resolve and courage." The book is intended to prepare the dead, the deceased, to enter the bardo, or intermediate state between death and rebirth, and to help them navigate it properly. Bardo is a word that breaks down into two words that it comes from: bard meaning movement, and do meaning island or stepping stone. So the meaning of the whole book can kind of be inferred there, right? It's what to do when you're in this place that is a step between life, between death and your rebirth into the next life. Bardo states, as they're called, are a state of existence similar in concept to purgatory that we hear about in Christianity, for example. Technically, these are states that happen entirely within the mind, though, not necessarily beyond it. The deceased person, called a bardo being, is born there as a mental body in the shape of their next incarnation. According to the book, the goal of the bardo state is for the deceased being there to be liberated from samsara, to find enlightenment, nirvana, and escape the cycle of death and rebirth, and not be reborn from this intermediate state that they are in after death. In the bardo state, the being's own karma that they've experienced in life, the circumstances that have led them to that point, conjures all sorts of visions, some of which are terrifying. The Lama, reading aloud from the book, is there to help the deceased recognize what they're seeing and make sense of it. There are 6 of these states described, but we're only going to talk about a few of them here. The first is the bardo of the moment of death. It begins when the person is physically dying, and the being enters an experience of what's called inner radiance, known as the luminous mind. Can briefly, in this moment, they can experience a kind of ultimate truth to reality. If they recognize that this is the ultimate reality, they become enlightened and are liberated in that moment. And that's it. You've achieved the goal. If they don't, they enter the next bardo in the process. The Lama's words here encourage them to see the luminous state for what it is. I think of that like seeing a bright light at the end of the tunnel or something like that people describe in near-death experiences. But again, if you don't recognize that you are one with that light, that it is you, and that you are it, then you move on to the next step of the process, the next bardo state, the bardo of reality. It's similar to what you experience when you're alive, maybe like a dream or seeing your past before you as you're in that moment, flashing before your eyes, you could say, right? It can disorient you and remind you of your attachments and keep you rooted in that world that you have just left. But the Lama's words here encourage you to recognize that you can't stay here, that your time here is done, that you must move on, and that you can't remain in this state of attachment. If you do, you will achieve nothing. After reminding them of this, the Lama warns them about the next bardo that they're going to experience, the next thing in the process. They say, "O child of Buddha nature, when your mind and body separate, the pure, luminous apparitions of reality itself will arise. Subtle and clear, radiant and dazzling, naturally bright and awesome. Do not fear them. Do not be terrified. Do not be awed. Whatever sounds, lights, or rays may arise, they cannot harm you, for you are beyond death now." The bardo being is confronted by a series of what they call deities, peaceful and wrathful deities. First, the peaceful deities appear. The book instructs the deceased to visualize them as a mandala of beings within their own body. They appear as a procession one at a time before them, striking emotional responses: fear, awe, excitement. The book instructs the deceased to steer clear of these emotions, to steer clear of the highs and the lows of these emotions, and recognize that these grand images of these deities are not separate from themselves, but manifestations of their own mind. None of it's real. It's just you, and you're not separate from it. This mandala of peaceful deities assembles themselves in a rainbow of color and dazzles the deceased with bright lights and rays. The book encourages them to achieve unity with that and to not be distracted by the dull path back to rebirth. If the deceased cannot identify with these deities, see that connection, that oneness, and become enlightened, then they will see the next procession, the procession of wrathful and blood-drinking deities. So they say. These will terrify, but the book says not to fear them, because they too are manifestations of one's own mind. If the bardo being can identify themselves with either the procession of peaceful or wrathful deities, the text says, "You will dissolve inseparably within the lights, and Buddha bodies and Buddhahood will be attained." They will be enlightened. But if they don't, if they become afraid of these beings, they won't attain Buddhahood there, and the deities will morph together. The peaceful ones join and become Mahakala, the protector of the Dharma. The wrathful ones become Yama Dharmaraja, the lord of the Buddhist hells. Yama becomes as vast as the sky, brandishing a wooden slate documenting past actions. His mouth echoes with cries of strike and kill. He drinks brains, severs heads, rips bodies apart. The bardo being faints from fear and will wake up later having failed to achieve liberation. The next bardo they enter now is the bardo of rebirth. Here, the being's karma determines which realm they will be born into, the realm of the gods, the jealous gods, the humans, the hungry ghosts, or even the Buddhist hells. They will see what are known as entrances and will be drawn to certain ones. And when they enter one of these entrances, they will be reborn and enter the bardo of birth. So this is an intense book, and that's as far as we're going to get into the bardos. But remember, it's not meant for you and I. It's meant for the dead. Corpses are the intended audience. For it is in those final moments after death that the book sees an opportunity for a quick path to enlightenment, a quick way to liberation, and an end to suffering. In scientific terms, these bardo states are not properly understood, but science is catching up. You may have heard of the concept of near-death experiences that I mentioned earlier, right? Someone dying on an operating table, seeing themselves from outside their body, then seeing a bright light and being drawn to it, drawn away from this life. that's pretty common in various cultures. They even see visions of heavens, angels, demons, hell. Recent testing has actually found that electric activity in the brain, though, does persist after the heart stops. This can actually take place for minutes or even hours after someone dies. The brain continues to have some level of function. And in some scans, that brain activity right after death resembles a dream, as if the person is experiencing a dream of their existence, even though they're no longer technically alive. So science is kind of catching up, right? There's a little bit of a scientific hint there that something is actually happening in these bardo states, the moments after death, but not quite there yet. I guess that's where this ancient book comes in. In the meantime, we have its wisdom, right? But I caution you to take it as you would any other metaphor, right? It is just a metaphor. It only points to the truth, and if you're not careful, you might mistake the finger pointing for the truth itself. What I would like to take away from the text, what I personally would take away from it is honestly the same thing that I take away from any other Buddhist teaching, which is that we are not our attachments. We are not permanent. And we are not us at all, right? There is no self. What is dying there to begin with? It is a manifestation of the mind, something that happens because something before it happened. That's the whole concept of karma to begin with, right? Cause and effect. You were born, and so you must die. But we are not separate from the reality around us, not separate from the lights or the deities or the things that we see in those final moments. That is us, and we are that, and we are everything. And if you can realize that you're not separate from the gods or the devils, but one and the same with them, that even the idea of death itself and even rebirth is only an illusion. Maybe if you remember that, the book suggests, in your final moments, then you might just find liberation right then and there. So that's all I got. But thank you for joining me. It's an interesting topic, and it's a difficult one to ponder, but honestly, it's something that can be a life-changing thing, to think about what the end might be and what might be beyond it, and what is really important to focus on in your life before you get to that point. So, thank you very much.